Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. У нас сегодня очень интересное мероприятие в Российском совете по международным делам. К нам в гости приехал наш старый и добрый друг, партнер и коллега Натали Рид. Сегодня очень интересное мероприятие в Российском совете по международным делам. Один из пионеров, старый и человек, который стоит, скажем так, на краю, на острие один из академического письма и проблематики, связанной с академическим письмом. Я коротко скажу о предыстории нашей сегодняшней встречи и о той проблематике, которую мы сегодня затронули. Мы с Натальей начали работать в 2012 году в рамках большого проекта РСМД «Глобальная наука», называется «Глобальная наука», проект долгоиграющий, он до сих пор идет, хотя видоизменяется, это живое письмо. И наша идея изначально состояла в том, чтобы помочь нашим российским исследователям получить те компетенции, которые необходимы им для большей представленности в зарубежной академической печати. Мы исходили из того, что в российской науке высок уровень знаний и компетенций как таковой, но не хватает компетенций именно по продвижению в зарубежной академической печати. Вот Натали в ряде своих публикаций справедливо указывает и выступлений справедливо указывает на то, что английский язык и русский язык и другие языки подразумевают разную систему, разную когнитивную систему, разную схему аргументации, разную, скажем так, парадигму подачи информации, и далеко не всегда эти схемы совпадают. И вот первая волна нашего проекта как раз была направлена на то, чтобы собрать группу наших российских исследователей и посредством такой вот, у нас год шли семинары с участием Натали, шла подготовка статей, и в качестве результата этого проекта опубликовать каждому из этих авторов статью в зарубежном журнале на английском языке. Ну, здесь базовая идеология наша состояла в том, что вот у нас девиз РСМД «Вместе в глобальный мир». Мы исходили из того, что наука – это одна из областей, которая глобализуется быстрее всего. И для того, чтобы, во-первых, капитализировать наши знания, во-вторых, получать максимум от знаний, которые приходят к нам из рубежа, нужно максимально тесно интегрироваться в эту систему, уметь в ней занять свою нишу и максимально получать от этой системы знаний и, скажем так, быть просто заметными в этой системе, избежать периферийности нашей науки. Мы исходили из того, что наши исследования незаслуженно мало представлены в зарубежной академической печати. И на первом этапе, тогда в далеком 2012 году, мы отобрали, у нас было 200 заявок на участие в этой программе, из них мы отобрали 19 заявок, и вот из этих 19 человек, это были вот лучшие из тех 200, у них были сильные, скажем так, представленные эссе, они понимали, что они исследуют, хороший был такой исследовательский опыт. То есть это были не какие-то там двоечники или аутсайдеры. Так вот, из этих 19 человек на выходе после почти 1,5 лет нашей работы, 1,5 года готовили статьи, опубликовано было всего лишь, коллеги поправят меня, 3 материала, правильно? 4 материала. То есть вот такая вот конверсия: 200, 19, 4. Причем многие из этих 19 отвалились вовсе не потому, что у них журналы отвергли статью, они отвалились еще на этапе подготовки статей. И мы в процессе этой работы выяснили целый ряд, скажем так, условий, которые делают публикацию возможной или невозможной. Но вот один из факторов очень заметных, и я сам преподаю в университете, и у нас мы много с университетами работаем по линии Российского совета по международным делам, у нас 11 университетов корпоративных членов, мы много взаимодействуем и с другими университетами. Так вот, одна из наших проблем не только и не столько в том, что мы плохо знаем английский. В конечном итоге публикуют же наших математиков, которые английский вообще не знают, их просто берут и переводят. Проблема в плане гуманитарных наук часто состоит в том, что, называя вещи своими именами, нам нужно честными быть друг перед другом и признавать какие-то неприятные факты. И Натали нам тоже помогает в этом. Так вот, одна из неприятных вещей состояла в том, что у нас просто-напросто достаточно слабая исследовательская база в гуманитарных науках. То есть, в принципе, мы, как ученые, выполняем базовые критерии научного знания, мы читаем книжки. С этим у нас все хорошо, это мы умеем. Собственно, нет ученого, который книг не читает. Можно быть очень умным, написать статью, но если там нету главы литературы, если мы не понимаем, не читаем книжек в этом узком направлении, то мы учеными считаться не можем. Публицистами, эссеистами, кем угодно, но не учеными. Так вот, эту графу, так сказать, чтение литературы мы неплохо закрываем. Но есть и другая графа, другая задача – это исследование. Причем исследования, проводимые на базе прозрачной методологии, на базе фактуры, эмпирические исследования, исследования на уровне среднего уровня. Вот с этим у нас большие проблемы, потому что многие у нас статьи, они сводятся к анализу литературы и дальше к высказыванию какого-то экспертного мнения. Вот мне кажется, так-то, так-то и так-то. Хорошо, молодцы. Но для современного уровня, скажем так, глобального, этого недостаточно, потому что у любого солидного журнала будет вопрос: дорогой мой, а как ты получил эти знания? Какова твоя процедура? И более глубинные вопросы: какова твоя исследовательская проблема, каковы твои гипотезы и как ты эти гипотезы тестируешь. Вот мы проводили такой небольшой эксперимент, смотрели статьи наших авторов, и далеко не во всех статьях сформулированы исследовательские вопросы, далеко не во всех статьях сформулированы гипотезы вообще. И в принципе для нашего журнала, сейчас это меньше распространено, но нормальная практика принять статью, в которой не поставлены исследовательские вопросы. И когда ты доктору наук говоришь, что, слушайте, а в чем ваши исследовательские вопросы? Говорит: а ты кто такой, чтобы мне задавать эти вопросы? Я доктор, а ты вот мальчишка, да, с дороги. Это, в общем, мы с большим уважением относимся к нашим заслуженным коллегам, но это проблему не отменяет. Проблема в том, что без определенной структуры материала научного и без определенной подпитки исследовательской его, конечно же, никто и никуда не возьмет. В свою очередь, это выводит на более серьезную проблему вообще инфраструктуры исследовательской внутри университета. Как делается исследование в университете? Готов ли университет дать своему ученому, своему сотруднику возможность потратить 1,5 года на одну статью? Или он его замучит: где твои ваковские публикации, где твои скоповские публикации, давай нам 5 скоповских за год. И при этом ты еще должен читать 1200 часов лекций и другую работу вести преподавательскую, ты должен еще быть замдекана или там как завкафедры или еще какую-то административную работу вести. То есть, в принципе, мы отвыкли от того, что ученый, он целит ценность в себе. Нужно как-то что-то бегать, какие-то как-то что-то административные какие-то дела выполнять. Из-за этой вот рутины мы теряем возможность сесть, спокойно провести исследования. И, кстати, отдельный вопрос об инфраструктуре этих исследований, о финансовой поддержке этих исследований, о внутренней университетской инфраструктуре. Да? Есть у нас микрогранты в университетах? Далеко не во всех. Поддерживаем ли мы такие долгосрочные, долгоиграющие исследования? Вряд ли. То есть ученый, который хочет соответствовать этим требованиям, хочет сесть и сделать полноценный долгосрочный ресерч и опубликовать его либо в виде полноценной ваковской статьи у нас, либо в виде публикации в Скопусе за рубежом, он проигрывает конкуренцию тем, кто садится и, не особо заморачиваясь, извините за недипломатичный язык, штампует 5 публикаций. И, пользуясь, допустим, хорошими отношениями с редакциями ваковскими, он их публикует, он выигрывает в эффективном контракте, и он лучше смотрится на конкурсе, чем вот тот, там, грубо говоря, честный трудяга, который говорит: слушайте, зачем я буду это делать, когда мне лучше сделать вот так, как сделал первый. То есть это уже я не говорю, что ваковские публикации наши плохие, и там очень много замечательных статей, сильные журналы есть. Но это не значит, что мы достигли предела совершенства. Работать нужно очень серьезно, и это во многом задача менеджмента университета. И здесь же взаимодействие проректора по науке, проректора по международным связям, библиотеки, которая ведет базы данных зарубежных публикаций, которые нужны для подготовки наших публикаций, и вплоть до различных фондов, руководителей, там, финансового директора университета и так далее. То есть это все очень сложный процесс. Я к тому, что я сейчас завершаю свою уже достаточно длинную речь, я не хочу монополизировать. Все-таки гость не я, а Натали. Но я хочу сказать, что вот у нас во многих университетах я сталкивался с тем, что есть вот такое русское ожидание чуда. Вот сейчас к нам приедет кудесник из Америки или там из Англии, и он всему нас научит. Вот приедет Натали и решит все наши проблемы. Нет, не будет. Натали нам может помочь, и другие наши коллеги, довести какие-то наши уже готовые процессы до ума. Но есть масса проблем, которые нам нужно решать на уровне управления университетом. И вот очень хорошо, что у нас сегодня в гостях, во-первых, Вера Ивановна Заботкина, проректор по международным связям РГГУ, корпоративный член Российского совета по международным делам. Мы очень активно взаимодействуем, очень честно, я бы так сказал. И мы всегда признательны Вере Ивановне, которая поддерживала вот на всем протяжении корпоративного членства РГГУ наши даже самые сумасшедшие идеи. Ну, без вас, например, не было бы тренинга для РГГУ по сайтам. А это был первый тогда тренинг. И вообще идея была очень сырая. И, в общем, это вот без этого первого шага не было бы всего проекта. Сейчас он уже стал на ноги, и нам стало, так сказать, легче дышать в этом отношении. И у нас коллеги Елена Николаевна Соловова и Елена Сергеевна Маркова из Высшей школы экономики. И очень хорошо, что здесь есть представители Вышки. Жаль, что Вышка не является пока членом Российского совета, хотя ректор индивидуальный член РСМД. Но Вышка примечательна тем, что пытается, как и РГГУ, и еще несколько наших передовых университетов и в Москве, и в регионах, внедрить лучшие практики. То есть вот эта вот борьба постоянная за совершенствование своей интернационализации, ресерча и так далее, она примечательна, мы ее видим. Вот, например, здесь хочу сказать, немножко отклоняясь от Academic Writing и отклоняясь от нашей сегодняшней дискуссии, вот мы ежегодно публикуем рейтинг порталов англоязычных. Вот в прошлом году Вышка у нас набрала больше всех баллов, первое место, ну и мы думали, что потолок уже, куда дальше Вышке расти. Вот в этом году Вышка рванула, так как вот мы ожидали, что середняки и, так сказать, аутсайдеры рванут вырастут за счет низкой базы. Мы ошиблись, вот середняки и отстающие, они как были середняками, так и остались. А лидеры, Вышка, ИТМО, целый ряд других, вот первого десятка, Томский кластер исследовательский, они пошли вперед. И я знаю, что у вас делается большая работа и по инфраструктуре внутренней исследовательской, то, о чем я говорил, да, то есть попытка выстроить вот эту схему. Поэтому, коллеги, мы будем очень признательны, если после выступления Натали вы сразу сможете дать вашу обратную связь. И я бы вас просил именно сделать это и с точки зрения научной, да. Вот, Вера Ивановна, я знаю, что вы очень активно курируете работу историков и лингвистов внутри университета, но еще и с точки зрения менеджмента университетского, создания университетской микросреды, который делает возможным долгосрочные исследования, которые в свою очередь делают возможными публикации в ведущих международных изданиях. Поэтому я сейчас передаю слово Натали, а потом для ваших коротких комментариев, либо по этой теме, либо по темам, которые вы сочтете нужным, мы камеру перенаправим в вашу сторону, потом примем вопросы, комментарии, так сказать, от наших слушателей. So, Natalie, the floor is yours. Natalie will speak English, and we are bilingual, more or less bilingual here. So, and our audience, internet audience, well, I suppose also has some level of proficiency in English. So you may raise questions both in English and in Russian. I will translate them to Natalie. So the more questions we have, the better. Not all of them will be addressed because in this session, because we are limited in terms of time, but we will definitely fix all of them. So Natalie, it's a pleasure for me, for all of us to have you here finally, on your way to Altai, or back?
Back.
Okay,
Coming back.
So thank you for finding time, and I hope we will have some time to speak after this session. I have some ideas on our project, but so I cannot monopolize this space anymore, and let me pass the floor to you for your comments. Again, we planned this meeting as very informal, so as an informal conversation between colleagues, between people who understand each other. So do not hesitate to propose ideas out of the box, or in any way you consider you think it's most appropriate. So floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And the only comment I have to make is, once I get started speaking, I lose track of time, so please tell me when it's time for questions, and I will wrap up with a sentence and we'll go on. So for those of you who are listening today or watching, I want to speak about the process of getting published in English when one is not a native speaker of English. And I work in a number of Western European countries. I also work in Russia. And over time, I have observed certain differences. So today I want to speak particularly to the differences that Russian speakers have from English speakers in how they understand and present information academically. Now, the theory I work from in all of my work is the linguistic theory of contrastive rhetoric. And this theory simply says that in every linguistic community, a community of speakers that understands, even if it's not exactly the same language, they are related languages and they understand how to look at the world, present the world, analyze what they see. These will be different from language to language. So with every new language, it's not a question of only learning vocabulary and grammar. You then have to learn all the unwritten underlying rules of how people in that community understand information, see the world, view the world, and understand the differences in the obligations of writers and readers and speakers and listeners and so on. And the theory also posits that all of these will be different and that one isn't any better than the other, they are simply different. So today when I speak about the differences between Russian and English, as an English speaker, I am not promoting English. I'm only telling you that if you wish to get published in English, you need to follow those rules, which turn out to be very different from the rules you apply when you write academically in Russian. So, first of all, if I understand correctly, from having worked with Russian students over the past 6 years, that Russians write academically pretty much according to Aristotle's rationalism, which is the development of theory, primarily the development of theory, with the understanding that certain truths are self-evident and one can understand them and intuit them without having to prove them. Whereas in English, we also follow Aristotle and have followed Aristotle for the last 200 to 250 years But we follow Aristotle's empiricism, which calls for proving everything step by empirical step. So even when one is writing a paper in English about theory, very theoretical paper, one has to analyze and discuss the theory with the tools and the presentation of Aristotelian empiricism, which is all about proving everything. So what I've discovered basically is that the major difference between writing in English and writing in Russian is that they are almost opposite from one another. Okay? Neither is better or worse than the other, but Russian students encounter really big problems when learning to think differently in English, just as I, as an English speaker, encounter very big problems when I consider expressing myself in Russian. So it's equal from either side. The problem for Russian speakers, of course, is that right now, by an accident of history, English is the big second language of the world, and all international publications are in English. In some countries, they can be in both languages. For example, one paper in French and another paper in English, or one paper in Russian and another in English. But to get published in the really good journals, you have to be able to write and present and organize your thinking as well as native speakers of English. So that's the problem, and I'm going to give you some of the differences today and explain them within the time that I have. So the first, I think, most important rule is that nothing in English is ever implicit. Everything has to be spelled out step by step and detail by detail in a very particular order. So the when, the where, the who, the what, the why must be in the paper. And another way of saying this, I think, is that an English paper is a self-contained universe. Everything that the reader needs to know about the subject the writer has chosen and the type of research and the research results and the method and the theory that the writer is using must be in the paper. The reader should never have to think, oh, they mentioned that theory, I think I read about it when I was at university, or oh, they mentioned that war. Now, when exactly was it? The writer's job in English is to tell everything that the reader needs to know in that paper in the right place. So often I see European writers and Russian writers mentioning a word, and I say, what does this word mean? Oh, it means blah, blah, blah. Well, why didn't you tell them that? Oh, I'm going to define it in the next section. That's too late. You have to define and explain everything the minute you first introduce it, even if it's only a very short introduction with parentheses saying a more complete description will appear in the next section, or in section 2 if the sections are numbered. So, in other words, English is the world's only 100% writer-responsible language. The writer has to do all the work in English. The reader doesn't have to know anything, doesn't have to remember anything from his or her education or his or her internal knowledge bank. Not because readers in English are stupid, but because from the time we learn to read, whether in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Australia, it doesn't matter. We are taught that that is the writer's job, not our job as readers. We are to read well-organized, fully contained papers that have everything we need to know, written absolutely clearly, and I'll come back to clarity in a minute, 100% clear, so that we absorb the information like a big fat sponge. We don't have to struggle with the language or guess what the writer means. And then we say, do I agree? Do I disagree? They didn't mention this point, and maybe that's a problem. But we don't have a problem with the writing, and we don't have a problem with lack of information. Now, in many other cultures, and I think Russian is probably one of them, to give the reader, so much detail is almost like insulting the reader, as if the reader should already know that. We understand that in English. We also put in information that we know that our reader already knows. But in Aristotelian empiricism, the only thing that matters is the argument, how you argue. And if the place in the argument is to give information that the reader already knows or probably knows to move to the next point, we give that information. The reader reads it really quickly because the reader usually knows it, but it's in the right place for the argument to be perfect, just like a mathematical argument. In mathematics, if there's a step that everybody knows in a mathematical formula and everybody knows what it is, you don't leave it out. You put it in there or the entire proof won't work. And it's exactly the same thing in writing in English. Your argument must be 100% perfect, like a mathematical proof. So, therefore, the most important thing in English is framing. Framing means telling the reader at every step what you are doing, why you are doing it, and where you are going with your argument. So, for example, in American English, we learn very young, and we laugh about it because we think it's silly, but we also say it because it's true, the following statement. The first thing you do as a writer is to tell them what you're going to tell them. The second thing is to tell them. And the third thing is to tell them what you told them, which sounds stupid, but that's how you argue according to Aristotle. First you say, here's the subject under discussion, here is the conflict, here is the issue, here is where we are missing information, and this paper supplies that information. This is what this paper is going to do. So all of that, which is called basically, you give the territory within the field. Okay, let's say the field is political science. Nobody can write a paper about political science. It's too big. What is your territory within political science? Well, maybe you're writing about Russia's relationship with one particular country. That's the territory. Then you have to give your niche within the territory. The niche is what's missing in the field. Okay? And I think a simple example would be, let's say, the field, a very simplified sentence for the territory would be, most papers in the field of X focus on the relationship between A and B. Then the niche would be, however, almost no papers, or very few papers, examine the relationship between B and B plus 1. That is the niche. That is what's missing. However, even that is not enough because the reader says, I never heard of B plus 1. Why should I care? So the writer then has to show the reader why this relationship is important. For example, very few papers examine the relationship between B and B plus 1, comma, a relationship critical for our understanding the important processes of X, Y, Z. Now the reader says, oh, I never thought of that. That's interesting. Let's see what this paper will do. And then the third thing you do in the introduction is say what the paper will do. This is called a purpose statement, but basically it is a contextualizing statement. It tells the reader, not in little details, but with very broad brush strokes, what the reader will find in the paper, what the paper will do. And it would go something like this. Using data from Russia and applying famous scholars' theory of something, this paper analyzes the relationship between B and B plus 1. So all of this, all of these three parts, establishing the territory, establishing the niche, and occupying the niche with the purpose statement have to take place in the first 3 paragraphs of the paper. If the purpose statement telling the reader what the paper will be about doesn't appear by at least the first sentence of paragraph 4, which is no later than the middle of page 2, the reader will stop reading because the reader says, I don't know what this paper is about. The writer is just going on and on and on and on. I don't need to read this anymore. And that paper will not get published. So that is telling them what you're going to tell them. Then you have to tell them throughout the paper exactly what you said. Give them the method, give them the theory, review all the literature on the subject to show what the literature has said, but what it hasn't covered, to show that you know the literature and therefore you are knowledgeable in the field. You explain the theory. You say this theory is better for analyzing this research problem than the others because, and you explain. You give your data, you give your method. Then you give your results. And all of that is called the body of the paper. And the order in which you present it, whether theory is first or method is first, depends on the journal you chose. And I will come back to journal analysis in a bit. That is telling them what you promised them. And then the conclusion is where you tell them what you told them. And then you conclude not by repeating your findings, but by explaining what the findings mean and perhaps implications for the field or implications for policymakers, maybe limitations of the paper. In certain fields, such as economics, they always have to give limitations, because the understanding is that no economic model is ever perfect, and so on. Okay, so it's a very, very clear model for how to write a paper, and all English readers and editors of the journals and reviewers that those editors choose, you don't choose your reviewer, the editors choose them, they don't know who you are, and you don't know who they are. It's called double-blind reviewing, and you have anywhere, depending on the journal, from 1 to 4 reviewers. And that's what they all expect. And if you don't do it, the paper won't be given what's called a revise and resubmit, which is a chance to revise your paper according to all the reviewer comments and resubmit it. The paper will just be rejected because it isn't written in a way that makes sense to an English reading readership. Okay? So, in order to do it right, you have to follow certain unwritten rules of English. One is a really big surprise to most Russian writers, which is in English, unlike French, unlike German, unlike Russian, less is more. The English intellectual proves his or her intellectual capability and academic knowledge by giving the reader the most information in the fewest possible words, but without sacrificing meaning. I think the big difference is we put the reader first. We know the reader is a busy person. The reader has very little time. The reader is busy often. The reader is a professor who is teaching, who is also doing research, who only has time to read a few papers, in a week or in 2 weeks. And the reader says, the reader is a very selfish person who says, which paper is going to give me information that I need for my career? And I want that information as quickly and clearly and fast as possible. So the reader is not interested in how many big words you know, how long you can make your sentence, how abstract and theoretical you can be with no details. The reader wants it quick, 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 in the right order, in the right way, argued according to acceptable methodologies, and so on. And so that's the big shock to all the students I teach in all the countries. And I work in about 7 countries, but I edit papers also for people from maybe 20, 25 different language backgrounds. And they all have the same problem. What? We show our sophistication not by changing our vocabulary all the time, but by never having 2 sentences in a row with exactly the same sentence structure. We vary the length of our paragraphs, but no paragraph should be over 14 lines because it's too long and the reader sees the paragraph as the essential unit of meaning and wants to be able to absorb it in one reading. And if it's over 14 lines, the reader will have to stop in the middle, absorb it, keep going, and the reader hates it. So I tell students, vary your paragraphs anywhere between 7 and 14 lines, but you shouldn't have 2 or 3 paragraphs of the same length in a row, because psychology studies show that people get bored when they see that. So there are all these differences. I call them the psychology of reading. In every language, there are different psychologies of reading because of readers' expectations of what a writer should or shouldn't do. So that's one thing. Another is that clarity is 100% essential in English. Every word must be clear to the reader at every single moment. Now, and English, because it doesn't have all the wonderful case endings that Russian has, lends itself easily to misunderstanding and to double meanings. Therefore, we have to pay absolute attention to certain parts of grammar to make sure we don't use a which or a that isn't clear, to make sure that this part of the sentence fits perfectly with that part of the sentence, and so on. Also, we write, not always, some journals are different, but primarily academic writing in English should be in the active voice. Who did what? Partly we do it because it's the shortest way to do it with the fewest words. But we want to know who the actor is every step of the way. Who did what? Who said what? I have read Russian papers in English where I had to write back to the author and say, wait, I don't understand from this sentence. Did the Russians do this to the Georgians? Or did the Georgians do this to the Russians? I can't tell from the way you wrote it. Will you let me know so that I can help you edit it? We need all the information, preferably in the active voice, which is another difference from Russian writing. I think the other thing I want to say about this is that journal analysis is critical. But journal analysis comes from having access to all the papers and all the journals. And in my experience, in all the countries I work in Europe, Western Europe, all the universities and all the research institutes subscribe to all the biggest publishers of journals that have papers in their fields. For example, Oxford University Press, or Taylor and Francis, or Sage UK. All right? And they subscribe to them. They pay these publishers an annual fee, and then all of their students or all of their researchers can have free access to every single journal and every single paper online that those journals publish. Therefore, they can see what has been published in the field and what hasn't. Now, why is that important? Because in English, according to Aristotelian argumentation and the way that academic writing has developed in the Western world, a writer has to give something new in a paper that has never been said before, research that shows something that has never been shown before, a theory that applies to this problem that no one has applied before and that gives better results. So something new has to come up every single time. How can you know what's new if you don't have access to the papers? And so that's what I tell rectors of Russian universities. That's what I tell everybody. If you have fields in which you want to be international, subscribe to all the journals in that field so that your students can read all the papers and find out what has been published so they can find something new. So then when you have something new, and while you're doing your research, you have to study all the journals that publish papers on that subject, and you have to eliminate all the ones that won't fit that paper. For example, maybe Journal ABC over here publishes primarily theoretical papers, and your paper is primarily empirical, or the opposite. Then you have to eliminate that journal, not for the future, but for that paper. So then, by the process of elimination, even when you're researching and doing your research, before you ever start writing, you begin narrowing your journal choice down to one or two. And let's say to one, the best possible first one for that paper. Then you have to begin studying that journal very, very carefully for several things. One is, how do they organize the information? Do they give theory first or method first? Do they have a 3-paragraph introduction or a 5-page introduction that includes the theory and the literature review? You have to copy the style of the journal. Why? To maximize your chance of getting your paper published in that journal. All journals are different, and they're different in their expectations, and they're different in their style and their use of language. Then you have to look at the language in the journal. For example, if you're doing research about problems that teenagers have in a certain situation, does the journal use the word teenagers? Does it use the word young people? Or does it use the word adolescents? You find the word that's used by most of the papers in that journal, that's the word you use. Does the journal say this paper? Does it say this article? Or does it say this study? You use the language that the journal uses. Do they use I and we for single or multiple authors in the paper, but not in the abstract. You follow the style. You find the most common form of abstract in the journal, and you copy that style for your abstract. The more that your paper looks as if it had already been published in the journal, the more it makes the editor happy. And the editor unconsciously says, oh, this looks like something we can use, and sends it out for review rather than rejecting it immediately because it is not appropriate to our journal. So these are other things that we do in English that are very, very important. Some European students tell me, their professors say, no, write a generic paper. Because then if it gets rejected, you don't have to rewrite it to send it to the next journal. And I say that paper will never get published because all journals are specific and a generic paper won't fit any journal. If you write for that journal, Journal A, and it gets rejected, oh, poor paper, it gets rejected, poor author, poor paper, it happens, it's life. You don't have to rewrite your research, your findings, your method, your theory, but you do have to rewrite your abstract, your introduction, your conclusion, maybe your language, to fit the style of the new journal. Mm-hmm. And I have seen people have a paper rejected, change exactly the way I said, and have the next journal accept it. It's part of life. I know in economics, the professors warn the students, they have 80% rejection rate in economics, to expect at least 3 rejections before a paper gets accepted. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, do you want me to go on? Have I used up my time?
Well, we have 7 minutes more.
Well,
if you don't mind.
No, is there something particular you think you would like me to talk about?
Well, it's up to you.
No, because...
Well,
I mean, I was just trying to cover the very, very basics.
Yeah. So I think that our meeting today is very valuable because your point implies a necessity of, let's say, adjustment to the rules of the journal and to the rules of the language and the paradigm of argumentation, which is, let's say, implied by the language or by the academic language.
Right.
And I agree with this approach. But what is important for our audience also is a way of, let's say, making the article possible in terms of research and in terms of, let's say, organization of the whole process of writing. And here your experience of with our project is very crucial because you could watch at the schedule and way of working of 19 people, 19 Russian scholars.
Yeah.
So you could assess the shortcomings of their work and the advantages of their work. So, if you could elaborate a bit on this, what frames, what habits, research working habits, following this 19 people experience, promote the success, and which block the success?
Okay, so I can think of several things. I saw some people who did really good writing and rewriting, but who let life interfere with finally sending the paper in. This is very common, and it's very common with people who don't have experience. In the European publishing world and in the Anglo-American publishing world as well, we know that if we don't get our paper in as soon as possible. Somebody else may do similar research and get their paper published, and all the work we did is for nothing because somebody else got there first. I think 2 of the people in our project discovered doing their final research, journal checking in other journals just before they sent their paper in, that somebody had just published the same a paper on the same subject with a bigger data set, and all the work they'd done was for nothing. Okay, that happens, especially in international relations where things change.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very fast.
so very, very fast. So a revolution in country X means all the research on the government is for nothing because that government is gone, and I saw that happen with one of the papers. Another one based a model on based his or her paper on a particular model, and suddenly in a government in a particular country, and suddenly the government changed and the model didn't work anymore, and the person had to reconstruct a new model. Okay, these things also happen in IR and political science. However, for the people who I found it difficult to push people to say, please, I haven't heard from you. Give me back the rewrite. Your paper is almost ready to submit. It's got a great title. It's interesting material. And then, we had a baby. We've been busy. We've been this. We've been that. And a European would say, first of all, an American would say, or a Brit, or an Australian, or a Canadian, hey, I've got a paper, it's really good, it gets in no matter what. Okay, even if I have to give up my weekend, give up my holiday, it gets in. Then, if we have a revise and resubmit, that is a chance to get published. And I did have an unusual person I worked with in Europe who said, oh, I need you to really work on this, Natalie, now because I'm going on my holiday. And I said, no. No. If you're not willing to invest in your chance to get published, why should I invest in it? Now you take it with you on your holiday, or I don't work on it, make up your mind. Come on. So that was unusual. Most people know they have to sacrifice time on their holiday. They have to stay up late at night because a chance to get published is the most important thing for their career. Okay, but the ones who did get published worked really very hard with me. Others worked hard also. I don't mean that they didn't. I found that a number of them really understood what I was teaching, did their very best with it. They really tried, but still, because the Western European languages are closer to English one way or another, and Russian is very, very different. There are huge grammatical and linguistic problems, so I have to edit not every paragraph and not every sentence. I basically have to edit every single line of writing. And I do. That's my job. I mean, it's a lot of work. It costs, but I do it, and then they get better with every paper. I think 2 of the people, maybe 3, have been published twice so far. Right. Yeah, which is really, and Yulia, I think, and Vitaly. Yeah. Right. So it's really wonderful, that one of them said on a second paper, he said, I didn't even send it to you, and maybe it has mistakes, but you were sitting on behind my shoulder talking to me all the time in my mind, and it's your paper as much as mine. He sent me a really nice email. It was very sweet. So basically, it's that Russian, it's not just a different alphabet, and it's a very, very differently constructed language. I mean, yes, Indo-European, but very different from English. So there will be grammar problems. And that's the job of an editor. So let me speak about that for a moment. In English, we know that the reader has to have a perfectly written paper. Therefore, a native speaker of English will rewrite and rewrite and rewrite a paper maybe as much as 16 times. We will write a first draft when we finished our research and we've studied the journal and we know how to write, and we'll write a draft, then we'll edit it for grammar, we'll edit it for sentences that are too long, we'll check our argumentation, and then we'll show it to colleagues in our department. And maybe they have some new ideas. Then we rewrite. Then we try to get the paper into an international conference. And then we get more comments from scholars from all over the world who are interested in our topic, and we use their ideas and put them in the paper and rewrite and rewrite. When we've done that, even native speakers of English who know that they're really smart researchers but not the best writers, they will send their papers to a professional English editor. If the native speaker does it, for the non-native speaker not to use a professional English editor is foolish. You have to have it edited. Some journals say, we want you to have your paper edited, or we strongly recommend you have your paper edited by a professional English editor. We can recommend some companies. You will have to pay them, and we cannot guarantee their work. Or you have to have it, and we want a statement from the editor that this person has edited your paper, because they get, I can't tell you how many badly written papers editors get all the time. They want a well-written paper. And now that everybody has the internet, there is no excuse for not having an English editor. And part of the problem is that you must, to be successful in English, you must write in English. If you write in Russian, the problem is that you will write thinking according to Russian ways of writing. You will write in the passive voice, you will use the big words, you will leave out some of the details, you will have wonderful theory, and a translator will translate what you wrote
as it is.
But they won't edit it. They'll translate it as is, and that kind of paper, even if it's sent to me, I can't do anything with it because all the necessary information is missing, and it's written for a Russian audience, not for an English audience. So the only way to succeed in the new language is to write in that language. A very famous linguist, Roman Jakobson, once said, the only way to learn a language is to murder it. You have to open your mouth, make the mistakes, and have people correct you. The same thing with your writing. You have to do your best and have people correct you. And you may have to go through several levels of editing. You may have to go through editing just for the grammar and then have editing later for the argumentation. But these things are all very, very important. And I want you to succeed, those of you who are listening. I want to level the playing field so that all non-native speakers of English have an equal competitive chance with native speakers of English for getting published in journals with limited space. So I wish you all the very, very best of luck, and I hope these comments have been useful.
Thank you very much, Natalie. You know, my son is 8 years old and he started his English courses at school. And yesterday we spent with him something about almost 4 hours in the kitchen, learning something in advance. We were learning to have a verb and its different forms and different words. So now I have another motivation for him to continue and to take these extra hours with me in the kitchen. So Natalie, thank you. Yeah, poor dad, I would say.
Poor dad. I don't know.
let me now pass a floor to our guests for quick comments or questions. It's up to you. So we will start with Vice Rector Zavodkina Verivanov, please. Floor is yours. Please turn the camera. Okay, we have one.
We have a camera is there, but
Okay.
I don't have any headphones. Is it okay? No microphone.
Speak louder.
I just speak loud. Okay.
Yeah.
So first, I'd like to thank Natalie. You're so inspirational. It's not the first time that I'm listening to you, and each time I get new aspect, new or just impulse. So thank you very much for that. I've got a few comments and questions. You say, well, first theoretical or methodological question. You say that your research is in the field of contrastive pragmatics. But actually it's wider than pragmatics, and I hope they agree. It's mental models that underlie the academic discourse in English and in Russian or another language. So it's cognitive also.
Yes.
So you are more than you're saying. It's cognitive pragmatic, contrastive approach. And very often when I'm giving some kind of lectures, I'm referring to you, quoting you, and saying that it's not just translation from Russian into English, just like you said, but it's just different model of the academic discourse structure.
Exactly.
And you cannot just translate. It will give no result, but its argumentation is different. In connection with this question, you mentioned that both Russian and English follow Aristotelian logics, but we in Russian, we follow Hegel. We don't follow Aristotelian, and that's true. That's the most maybe challenging.
Is it?
Yes, because just like in France, in Russia, we follow Hegel, and this argumentation, almost mathematical argumentation, is quite a challenge for our scholars. They're not used to prove every argument. They just sketching around ideas, and that's enough. But your approach, Anglo-Saxon approach, requires absolutely different type of argumentation. Argument, proof, and that's what is lacking in our academic culture. Also, I'd like to say that clarity of persuasion, that's what we are lacking. And to some of our professors, being too clear is not being so intellectual enough. And providing too many details is explaining everything might be an insult to the intelligence of the reader.
Exactly.
See, that's our position. We are a very intellectual nation, that's true. We don't want to bother about whether it is clear or not. And in this connection, I'd like to remind you, Pinker wrote a book, just the Educated Person Guide to 21st Century Writing, but he writes about the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is that we think that everybody else knows what we know. This is tunnel vision, which you're telling about. So, and that's what we should just fight against, because we think everybody knows what I know. I don't have to explain. And this is the curse of knowledge. And I agree with you. Practical question. We or I? So what is more preferable? Because still,
I can
it's the
answer that.
question. Yes, so I'd like to finish with this very practical, very concrete question.
Natalie, if you don't mind, I will gather all of the questions.
Oh, first,
to
okay.
save time.
Then I'll make notes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we would also like to thank you for today's presentation. We were lucky to hear your previous presentation at the same place a year ago. And we wanted to thank you for the book, which we use and which we promote. And our students, our postgraduate students and our teachers find it most helpful and very instrumental. My first question, very quick one. I heard that you are working on a new revised version of the book.
That's right.
Why did you decide to revise it? And if there are going to be any new things that you introduce in it, what are they going to be? My second very quick question is, I agree that it's a challenge equally for native speakers and for non-native speakers to write an article and to get it published. And I know that lots of young scholars in Russia, once they try to write in English, and at our university, High School of Economics, it's been, thank you Ivan for mentioning this, it's been a very serious work. Like our infrastructure, you know, it pushes us to write and get published in English. And so lots of young scholars and experienced scholars started writing and they were published in English. But still, lots of people feel, you know, deep frustration because the article, the preparation of article takes longer when it's done in English. So, what is a normal period, even for a native speaker, to prepare and to get published? Because our teachers, once they know that it's a normal period, provided that thanks to you after this lecture, they know about the steps, which we also ignore. Like before publishing, pilot it at conferences, send it to professional editors. So how long can it be for an experienced writer to get his article published so that we do not feel that we are just, you know, inferior in any way because it takes us too long? And one more question, the last one. Ivan also mentioned in his speech before that one of our weak points is research methods that we use, or just justification of what we are writing about. Among many different research methods in linguistics and in the humanities, what would you mention as the most crucial ones? Because not always it's empirical knowledge. Do we actually have to use some experiments and, you know, experimental methods? Or is it still up to the theme, as you say, territory and the niche? Because very often our scholars are discouraged because they expect the editors and publishers to give priority only to the articles that are based on thorough experiments, and empirical knowledge that comes from experience or from observation is considered to be less important, less reliable. So what would you say to that? Thank you.
Okay.
And
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the hosts to invite us here to take part in this seminar. Thank you very much. And we hope that we'll go on with our future cooperation, our communication when your book will be finished. Our task is, as we have already in our University High School of Economics, the infrastructure helping young researchers, young scientists to write papers, to do their research. But as for us as humanities, most of them, I think, we deal with the teachers and lecturers of English as a foreign language and their practitioners, and we think that they don't care about the niche of their research even. And our task is to motivate, to help them find this niche on their research. That's why it's very important for them to motivate. And we hope that we'll cope with this task in the future. Thank you very much. And I think that we should save time for our questions of our listeners.
I would like to add, because I'd like to thank РСМД, Russian International Affairs Council, for initiating this project, Global Education, for inviting Natali. And I must tell you that Russian State University for the Humanities, RGGU, is now one of the 39 universities which will be carrying out a priority project of our government called internationalization, and it's called in more detail. It's called the expert potential of Russian education, and because of this, internationalization of both education and research is very high on the priority list of our university, and as a result of the global education program, again thanks to Riak and Natali, we've created a special program for the students, for graduate students, and they're studying academic writing, first thing. Then second, of course, the Center of Academic Writing with the help of our American partners from Dickinson College. And this is paid much attention to, and also the system of microgrants to support young scholars is introduced at our university. That's very important. And as a result, you see, we are the winners of a huge grant from RNF, Russian Scientific Foundation, on cognitive mechanisms and discourse practices on blah, blah, blah. And half of the participants, 30 of them, are below 35. So they're young scholars who already have Scopus publications and who will produce each year, 15 publications. So I'd like just to say that your initiative was so timely and so important, and there are already fruits. And we are working to support the initiative to spread, and we hope that within the next couple of days we'll have more Scopus and Web of Science publications, because people are aware of it and they know how to do it properly now, and this awareness is important.
This makes me so happy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And then the last thing, in English, the new meaning of the word woke, W-O-K-E, woke, at least in Britain, is to be responsive to the social challenges, to be responsive, so to be aware, to be awake. Now, thanks to your project, we are awake, and we are ready to respond with action.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivan.
So, Natalie, could you please address these questions, and afterwards we'll grab some questions from the web.
Okay. So, in no particular order, we or I is very simple.
Yes.
I for individual authors, we for multiple authors. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Now, there's a benefit and a drawback for each.
Yeah.
While writers who use I try to write their sentences in a way that uses I less often, those writers can then use the word we to include their readership. As we know, as we shall see, and so on. And, or we look at, this problem, as we understand it in the field. But if you are multiple authors, 2 or more, then the word is we. We do this, we do that, but then you cannot use we to include the audience, because you get only one meaning of we per paper. So there's a benefit and a drawback for each. And how much we or I you can use in a paper depends on the journal. So that's a simple answer. About the issue of Hegel,
Yes.
a quick story. A student of mine, a Danish student, the Danes are very forthright. They talk back to their professors. They're just, everybody's equal. No problem, no hierarchy. And she was at a conference in France, and there was a French professor, and she became known very quickly as the student who asked questions of the professor. This was not done. And at one point, she reported to me, she asked him about clarity. Why wasn't he discussing clarity? And I'm using my own words, and I'm just giving the gist of what she said, but essentially he said, Mon Dieu, why would I want to be clear? If I am clear and I make it very clear to my readers, they say, oh, we can understand it, therefore he can't be that kind of an intellectual. But if I write long sentences and I make up new words like Foucault or Bourdieu, and I make up new language, and my sentences are very long and difficult to read, they say, oh, he's so hard to read, he must be brilliant. But in English, it's the opposite. In English, we think it's somebody trying to show off how big his or her vocabulary is, and it's boring, and who cares? Okay?
Okay.
So that's basically it. About the revision and what's in the revision. The book first came out, the book is getting published in international journals, Writing Strategies for European Social Scientists. It first came out in 2010, and in the years that I've been teaching, using it, and observing students, I kept thinking of new things I wanted to add. And what I realized, and I've always realized, but even more so now, is the difficulty of teaching argumentation. Because an argument is like a huge river with 700 or 800 tributaries, smaller rivers feeding in. And the trick in argumentation is to know which river needs to come in at which point to keep the argument moving. And that is something that one learns by reading and analyzing papers for how they argue, and practice. Just like if you want to play beautiful Beethoven sonatas, you have to start with scales on the piano and practice. So it's the same thing. So I have enlarged the section on argumentation, made it much more detailed. I have enlarged the section a little bit on what goes where in a paper. I have enlarged the section on journal analysis because I found that people were sticking to the 10 main questions and not going into, for example, if there are 3 paragraphs in a conclusion, what does the first paragraph do and how does it do it? What does the second paragraph tend to do and how does it set it up? What does the last paragraph do? Is it in the present tense? Is it in the past tense? For example, one student whose paper I was editing had a mix and match of past and present in her conclusion or discussion. And I said, what's going on? What did they do in the journal? She said, oh, maybe I did it badly, but when they have the concluding part of the discussion, it's in the past tense. And then when they have the discussing part of the discussion, it's in the present tense. And she saw the pattern. So once I saw that, then I could edit it for her. So the more patterns you come up with, the better. So I enlarged that section and I cut out some things so as not to make the book so much bigger that I knew people could get elsewhere and that were not that important, such as how to punctuate a vertical list, since most journals don't use vertical lists, and so on and so forth. So the book, while it is only perhaps 2 pages longer, I believe is stronger in the areas that the students and readers most want from me. And also includes a few examples of issues that Russian scholars have faced. Okay, with the permission from those scholars to use some of their sentences or ideas. What else? Period of preparation. So a journal, depending on the field, from the time the researcher submits a paper, the writing can take a lot of time anyway, but submits the paper, or let's say starts writing the paper, to when it gets through perhaps 1, 2, or 3 rounds of revise and resubmit, can be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Ooh. Oh yes, it is and that is why for one paper in science, in the hard sciences, in chemistry and biology, they're shorter papers, they can do 10 a year. They do an experiment, they write a paper. They do another experiment, they write a paper. In the humanities, in philosophy, in the social sciences, one paper can take a very long time, which is why if you have a chance to work on a revision, that is your highest priority, and if it means you don't see your friends and you don't go out and party and you lose a vacation, a 1 week of vacation, you do it because your career depends on that. In the Western world, how many papers you've published and what journals you've published them in determines if you become an associate professor, a professor, an assistant professor. How many publications, what kind of journals, what ranking are they, and so on and so forth. So yes, it's a long, long period. Your students should not feel bad. One of my Russian students said, Natalie, I don't know why you say I'm a good writer. It takes me an hour per paragraph to write in English. And I said, as a Russian speaker, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, that's
I think it is. Then when you edit, it's easier. But yes, it should. It's okay. With the next paper, maybe it will go a little faster. And with the next one, a little faster. About research methods and empirical research versus theoretical. It depends on the journal. Some journals really look at theory. And they really have, and those, but they usually tend to have a data set along with them. For example, the ones that belong to associations like the British Journal of Sociology or the American Anthropological Association journals. You know, these journals are interested in what's going on in the field. But there's usually sometimes there are short, only theoretical papers. But usually there's some little case study they use to bounce off of. Sometimes there's a lot of theory, and then they say, okay, but in this country, their political system is this, in this country it's this, in this country it's that, and you get different results, and my theory shows that these results, blah, 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 blah. It's predictive. But often, for example, I'm thinking of someone who wrote a qualitative paper about silence and how silences in interviews can yield incredible information. If the interviewer says something and they clocked how many seconds the silence was. And they used these few interviews to show what happened if they were silent for a while. The person would start talking and would start giving them information that the informant wouldn't have given had there not been the silences, or had they jumped in during the person's silences. That there are qualities of the silences. They can be nervous, they can be thoughtful, and so on and so forth, but they still had the interview data. That's the qualitative work. But you don't have to have a huge body of interviews. You just use the ones that you need for your theoretical point. But usually you need something. Now, there are some journals that are more theoretical, but that's tricky because then what research is it based on? And they all want some sort of research. Now, you might research what's done in various other journals and say, I'm thinking of John Swales, whose work I used. He's the one who came up with the CARS method, creating a research space, which was establish the territory, establish the niche, occupy the niche. He didn't make it up. He observed it and gave it a name by reading and reading and reading papers and say, how do they create a space for their paper in the literature? And they do it by finding something missing or finding something that's contradictory and they can resolve the contradiction, or finding something that no one has solved because of methodological problems and they have a method that works. Okay? So again, it depends on what the journal's interest is, and that is a problem. Teachers not caring about the niche is tricky because that's probably their training, since the niche was never important historically in Russia. If you can get them a paper by John Swales, S-W-A-L-E-S, he's written a number of books and papers and about his concept. and they're very useful. And people have written a lot of books about his theories because they were so important. But again, it was an observation. He didn't make up something new, but he observed something that nobody else had observed before. And sometimes an observation about the field that a young scholar makes, where no one has observed it before, can be good enough, but the database then would be the published papers in the field and what they do or what they don't do. Okay? So, did I cover everything, I think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for your
for very
questions.
comprehensive answers. And just to follow up what you said about the deadlines and timing of the preparation of the article for an international journal. I remember my conversation here in RIAC when we were studying the this project, and the question here in RIAC was when we will have a result, a tangible result, because we invested huge money into this project, well, relatively, and the issue was very bureaucratic. So when should we expect the result? And I was quite blunt and candid, and I said at least 3 years.
What?
And I said, what? And I said, well, what? It will be about 6 months or 1 year at maximum, because funding is usually budgeted for one year. So very often we managed to overcome the problem, but very often we have constraints in terms of rules of the game to report on the results, and 3 years is a minimum. That was my next point. First year is the research, second year is the preparation of a draft, third year is journal analysis, subscription, and blah blah, rewriting, editorial stuff, etc. So 3 years at least. So in 3 years, one can get a BA degree. Yeah? This is a very important thing for the university management to provide. That's why I mentioned this in the beginning, to provide an important environment for scholars. And actually we got very short of time, and we can afford ourselves the luxury to get only one question from the web, but it is very generalistic. And to some extent it is out of the topic of our discussion, but still it's interesting. The question of the user, whose name is Ksenia, she didn't identify her surname or position, and the question is, following your experience of editing lots of Western European publications. We know that you have an extensive record in Copenhagen and doing lots of work for Europeans. So editing, let's say, foreign publications. What is the interest of Europeans and maybe of Americans to Russian scholars? And I think this question is important because that's what I have started with. The aim of this project is to increase the visibility of Russians in the foreign academic press. So what's your assessment about such a visibility?
I would say that there is very little visibility. And once I started working here, I began asking all my younger colleagues that I work with in Germany and Switzerland and Austria and Norway and Sweden and Denmark, how many Russians do you come across at conferences? And the answer was usually none. Oh, an occasional professor with 2 students, none. So they said, they probably can't get the visa, they don't have the money to send them, we don't know, but we don't see them. So I would say very little visibility. And going to conferences is huge. I think almost every European scholar I know, and I'm talking about PhD students, they go to anywhere from 1 to 5 conferences a year, whether, or maybe more, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in the US, whether they're in Tokyo, whatever. They go to the conferences to be visible, to, if they can't present a paper, they might get a poster. And then people will come and they can discuss it. They get ideas, they make contacts, they network with other scholars.
Excellent.
To them, the conferences are an essential part of networking. If they can meet, let's say, an American or a Brit or a Canadian, you know, who is doing similar work, then they can collaborate. And then now they have somebody who's a native speaker who can write the paper or who can edit the paper. And that saves them huge amounts of time, and so on and so forth. So the conferences are critical, and Russians are not visible. So that's my answer. I wish it were otherwise, because they should be. My experience with the students I worked with in the Global Science Project is they have wonderful ideas, they have great things to say, and they've got to get them out. And I'm willing to help, but somebody has to be able to fund it.
Right.
You know, because I have to be able to
Yeah.
pay my mortgage. You know, I mean, all of us have to make a living. And so I want to be able to help.
This is our task as a
Yes.
developing
Yes.
institution in one way or
And
another.
and in terms of publications, are they visible in publications, if not at the conferences?
question.
But
I've seen some in, I would say, in international relations and political science, I've seen some. I think in the sciences, again, in chemistry, biochemistry, physics, I think a lot of Russians are getting published. And part of the reason is the way you argue in English is the scientific way of all arguing within the sciences. And it's much more clear, and it's easier, I believe, in the sciences to get published. The social sciences and the humanities are different because there's so much more writing. I would say only in statistical material and economics do I see huge amounts of formulas, where I don't touch the formulas, I only look at the sentences. But otherwise, it's writing and developing an argument. And actually, that's much more difficult in qualitative work than in quantitative. Because in qualitative work, the writer has to make up a new frame from the beginning, whereas in quantitative work, the frame is pretty much there. Here's the problem, here's the issue, here's our data, here's what we did, here's the method we used, here's why, here's what we found, here's what it means. It's very straightforward. So again, I would like to see more Russians everywhere.
Yeah.
Thank you, but unfortunately many young or beginning scholars believe that qualitative is easier than quantitative. And you know, that's what they try, and then they get frustrated when they are not published.
Of course.
Because they do not understand the rules
Of the game.
of the game. Exactly.
Exactly. No, I think that's a very common mistake. Or that qualitative is more important because it has more theory. You have to have theory everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah.
So you can't have a paper without a theory, except in certain kinds of economic models where the theory is implicit in the model. But still they discuss theory. So, but we discuss theory in an empirical way.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I have to close this vibrant discussion. Natalie, thank you very much. And we are continuing our collaboration. We have some interesting initiatives from our universities. We'll have a separate talk on this.
Okay. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And thank you for to our guests and to all of the people, to all of the friends of Russian Council who joined us in the web today. Thank you.
Thank you.